A very good morning, and you're welcome to today's Signpost webinar. We hope you're keeping safe and well wherever you're joining us from this morning. We all know that the clock is ticking when it comes to climate change and the impact that it's having on our world we live on today. Never has it been so urgent to develop practical ways for us to decarbonize our society. So today we'll be discussing how innovation is driving climate action in the dairy sector. And to tell us more about this, we're joined by Stewart Gee, who is coordinator of the Climate Kick Deep Demonstration Partnership. Good morning, Stewart. You're very welcome to today's webinar.
Good morning, Mark. How are you?
I'm very good.
Good morning,
good.
all.
So, Stewart, you're coming to us from the lovely County Laois, I think, this morning. Is that right?
Yeah, lovely Laois.
Very
My
good.
lovely Laois. I don't know the words, so I'm not going to break into song.
Okay. Stewart, could you tell us a little bit about your own background and what brought you to this project that we're going to discuss today?
Yeah, sure. So, look, I suppose essentially I'm farmer's son, no farm left for me. Went off, worked overseas in international development of all things for a long time on agriculture and sustainability with subsistence farmers mainly all over the world. And then came back to Ireland and was kind of looking to get involved more in the Irish agri-food sector, just with family stuff and all the rest. Didn't want to be traveling so much anymore. And this role came up. The partnership had already been agreed between DAFM and EIT Climate Kick, and it's actually mentioned in Food Vision under Mission 4. And they were looking for someone on the ground here in Ireland to kind of be the boots on the ground and the local content person, I guess, essentially.
Okay.
So I applied and I got the job.
And in a nutshell, how would you describe this EIT Climate Kick? How does it exist?
So the EIT bit is the European Innovation Technology, and then you've got a climate, and then the KIC bit stands for Knowledge and Innovation Community. So there's more than just us. We have about 130 members, and we're always looking to expand that. So it's a partnership. It is a community of like-minded organizations, I guess. All of our funding would have initially come from Europe, and we would have passed that on through accelerator programs and entrepreneurship programs. But that is shifting now. Our funding is coming to an end, and we're looking for ways to use what we've learned over the last 10, 12 years to really catalyze climate action and to create impact and to actually impact on the numbers that we're trying to work with. So that's where the deep demonstration approach has come out of, and this idea of systems innovation as a service to people who are trying to tackle these challenges.
And this is a partnership with the Irish Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine as well.
Yes. So initially it was a 2-year partnership with DAFM putting in 80% and us putting in 20%. That would have finished next February, but it's just been, I think we're co-creating the next phase of it now, so it is looking like it'll be extended for another number of years. Okay. Obviously, you can't do systems change quickly, so yeah.
Yes, great. Well, that gives us a good overview. So, Pat, I didn't even say good morning to you. Good morning, Pat. Hope you're well today.
Very good.
You're going to help us with questions later on. So Stewart, if we ask you to share your screen with us, your presentation, and to remind everybody that today's presentation is being recorded and will be available on the Teagasc YouTube channel, along with the presentation will be on the Teagasc website. And if you want to catch the webinar on the move, you can listen back to it on as a podcast on any of the popular podcast platforms. And at the very bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A tab. You can use that to send through questions for Stewart at the end of his presentation. So we'll hand over to you, Stewart, and we'll talk to you after the presentation.
Cool. Thanks, Mark. Okay, so I'm going to run through. Let me get my slides to change here. Here we go. Just a little bit of painting the picture of how the partnership has come into being. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about our process and how our approach to systems change and systems innovation. And then I'm going to talk a bit more about specifics to the project that we're working on here at the moment. And then we can open up for a Q&A at the end. So, as I said earlier, this partnership was already kind of agreed in some ways in the Food Vision document. It's under Mission 4. where there was a commitment to engage with partners to develop a coordinated set of innovation actions and to collaborate with other networks and to try and to support the transition to a climate neutral and circular bioeconomy. So that's how it kind of started out. So I suppose, what does a systemic approach bring to Ireland? This is kind of standard enough stuff in some ways. And instead of looking at the different parts of the puzzle, we look at the whole puzzle and what is the big picture and what are we trying to achieve? Instead of analyzing just individual little parts, we're looking at, okay, taking all that together, synthesizing that information and looking at the root causes of why, whatever the problem is, and trying to address that. And then we're trying to be as participatory as possible and to have as inclusive decision-making as possible, to co-create solutions as much as possible. This is always a challenge because, just getting the time to go and sit with people and meet with people and engage is a challenge, but we're doing our best to try and build that in, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. And then from, working in this place where you expect to know what your answers are going to be, to being a little bit more open-minded and going, okay, let's just stick to the process and see what comes out of it, which is not always easy. And it's a very different way of working than probably my previous background in consulting, where you're expected to deliver, this is what you're going to deliver, off you go. Whereas with this process, it's much more, okay, let's figure out, get the right people in the room, let's go deep and see where that takes us, and then go again. And I think that bit about going again is the last point there, about the moving away from linear to more regenerative circular design ideas. So we're trying to build in learning loops. So we don't have to get it perfect the first time, but we reflect on that and we go, okay, what can we do better? We go again and we get it better next time. So it's continuous improvement, really. So the objective of our partnership, as I said, it is demand-led and involves co-designing interventions with the key stakeholders across our agri-food sector. I should say it's called a land agri-food deep demonstration, but it does include the marine as well, which to make it even more complex. So the point of our first year of work was to come up with this portfolio of large-scale interconnected interventions in the system. I'll describe those a bit more detail in a few minutes. But that's our theory, is that there is no silver bullet, that you have to address multiple things at the same time. As we'd say, you've got to pull on multiple levers of change at the same time, and understand how they're all impacting each other, and build in this learning by doing process, both within each of those interventions, but across them as well. So hopefully that helps us make better informed decisions and about our choices to meet our climate goals. So that's a little bit on the background. The process so far here in Ireland. So I guess we started in March last year, really, maybe April kind of time. And we spent a long time doing stakeholder engagement. I suppose we have a kind of a basic 4-stage process. It's never as simple as putting things into 4 very defined steps. There's always, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, 4 steps forward, 5 steps back, kind of a thing going on. But the first bit is defining the vision and the intent is what we call it. So obviously we had food vision that had just been agreed, so we didn't really need to go into a huge amount of work in trying to get stakeholders aligned on a common vision and intent, because the 4 missions from food vision, regardless of whether you agree with everything that's in food vision or whether it will deliver or not, it's kind of hard to disagree with the intent behind the 4 missions and the overall vision of Ireland wanting being a leader in sustainable food systems. So that was an easy enough. We had a lot of the groundwork had already been done for us in that respect, and it was just kind of validating that and then moving on. And then the framing then is defining the intervention strategy So what we did was we looked at the agri-food system in Ireland, we mapped it, not a classic systems map by any stretch of the imagination, because it is so complex here, and we felt it would have just looked like a big ball of string. But we did map it, and we spent a lot of time engaging with stakeholders to understand, what's behind the numbers in terms of our national statistics and stuff on the various aspects of the system. And then we looked at, so what are our problem spaces, or as we kind of framed it, our innovation space, so look at it from a more positive perspective. And so we kind of frame that as a cube with 3 axes with different things on each axis. And we kind of look at this is all our interventions need to fit in here. So anything we want to do needs to touch off all 3 axes. And connected up, the cube should be full, essentially. The space, there should be no blank spaces in our cube. So that's essentially, I know that could be a little bit hard to get your head around. It took me a long time to figure it out, but that's essentially what our theory of change is around that. So then we get on to this portfolio piece, which is where we've agreed, our stakeholders have helped us come up with this portfolio of actions. We're currently in this activation phase for that portfolio. So we're trying to get kind of co-design the actual, we have the topics, we have the ideas, but we need to build them into an actual tangible deliverables and projects. And we're working on that at the moment. And we put success metrics to those. And then we're into this final stage, which is sense making and the feedback loops, where we build into the design of our work opportunities to reflect on what we've done. Has it worked? Has it not worked? To pull in information from outside, so make sure we call it innovation scanning, to see what's happening in the rest of the world, and is there stuff that we can just pull into the Irish situation, not just the rest of the world, but outside of our initiatives here in Ireland, to make sure that we stay on top of the game and we don't miss a beat. And hopefully then that leads to better decisions and better solutions and more impactful solutions. That's the theory. So, as I said, we did a huge amount of stakeholder consultations. We have a consultative group, a multi-stakeholder consultative group that oversees all of this. There's 25 organizations on that, ranging from Department of Agriculture, Department of Environment, Department of Higher Education, Department of Taoiseach, Department of Enterprise. Then a lot of the state agencies, so Teagasc are obviously on it. We'd have Board BIA, Quilcha. We have the Strategic Investment Fund, Bank of Ireland, some of the farming organizations, and then some industry reps as well from the meat and dairy side, and also from the marine bioeconomy side. I'm probably leaving a few people out there, so apologies if anybody's on the call and they're feeling left out, but it's quite a diverse group, and they kind of approve or not everything that we do. So we get together maybe once every quarter to discuss how things are going. Beyond that, we've held a huge number of one-on-one interviews or one-on-twos with individuals across the sector here in Ireland. And more recently, we're getting into, as part of our different flagships, getting into having focus groups with actual farmers themselves, rather than just inviting farmers to be some stakeholders at some of our events, because we feel it's hugely important that we design from the bottom up and not from the top down. So we've attended loads of events, obviously, in Ireland as well, and we facilitated some of our own. As part of our deep demo process, we held 3 kind of fairly large workshops. We spread them around, so Ashtown, and then we did one in Galway City, and then we did one down in Fermoy in Moore Park as well. They were all done last year. And then we've had kind of, for a couple of areas that we felt we weren't hitting enough or putting enough emphasis on, we had a tillage and horticulture focus group down in Athy back in February, and we've had a few online meetings with some representatives from the blue bioeconomy, so the marine sector as well. And then obviously I'm part of a European-wide organization, so while I'm kind of the face of this here in Ireland, I have a large team of various experts supporting our work here from across Europe. So we pull on them as well, and our wider climate kick community as well. So all of that, and we have kind of 4 kind of documents, I suppose, that we produced. The systems map I mentioned. We also did a policy insights report, which looked at climate action and CAP strategic plans across, the CAP strategic plans are across 8 European countries, and then 4 other countries as well that aren't in CAP, so outside Europe. Then we've done this innovations report, which has focus areas, chapters on carbon farming, just transition, circular economy, alternative proteins, various bits and pieces like that. And then we obviously have to find, part of our mandate is to find the funding to implement all these things that we're talking about as well. So we're looking at, we started scanning the funding and financing landscape, and this work has moved on now quite a bit. So all of that gave us a huge number of ideas. A lot of them were existing and some of them were new. None of them were ours, I would say. I don't think anything in there I could say I thought of that. They all came from other people and other reports or pieces of work. And we curated all of that with this help of our consultative group into 7 flagships. So I've probably covered this policy scanning bit already. I don't think there's too much more I need to add in there. And the innovation piece, I think, is really important, that this is continuous through our work, because there's so much research and innovation happening around the world, not in Ireland, number one, but around the world on top of that, that we need to keep on top of it to make sure that we have the most, we place our bet on the best possible solutions, or the ones that are most likely to succeed. So that's really important. And we're involved in other projects, European-wide projects around clean farms, which I know Teagasc is also involved in, and the Credible project, which is a network on carbon farming and stuff as well, that we try and pull in from that. I've mentioned the funding and finance piece. So as an organization, we're also establishing an investment fund that will support this kind of funding portfolios of change. So we're working on that as an organization. And then this other critical piece, which obviously is very close to Mark's remit here, Mark and Pat's remit here, the capability building piece. Now, initially we're focusing mostly on the department and on their needs around wanting to be able to deliver systems innovation as a department and drive that forward. But I think we will also be addressing capability needs across stakeholders within the kind of the focus areas of our flagships as well. Okay, so then on to our 7 flagships. So our original mandate was to look at how do we achieve the 25% reduction targets in emissions by 2030. Now, you can see a quick look at these flagships shows that flagships go well beyond that. And I think that was reflected by what people were telling us, in that, there's a huge amount of research and technology and actions on the ground already focused on that 2030 agenda. So we didn't feel there was a massive amount of innovation that we could bring in there, other than around how do we make it happen. We know a lot of the things that are in the MAC and all these things that you guys are trying through the Signpost Farms. So there's not a huge amount of innovation to be brought in there, other than how do we make it scale it quicker, I guess, these things. But what came out really strongly was, and this came up from a farmer who stood up in our first workshop and he said, what does this look like for me? What does my farm look like in 2040 or 2050? And that has really resonated with me in particular, but I guess the whole team. And so we said, okay, well, let's food sector look like in 2050. So let's create a much longer term vision and co-create that with, obviously, with farmers, but with other stakeholders. Now, this is early stages of design, so we're not sure how it will look, but it could be a citizens' assembly or it could be something else. We're not really sure, but we're engaging with senior management and DAFM to kind of flesh out how we go about this. But I think it's a really interesting piece of work. The second flagship then is around looking at new value chains or new products from existing value chains. So, all the stuff we produce today is great, but it may not be what we'll need in the future. There's always new things coming online, and there's, we've got grass biorefining, for instance, where you can break down grass into 4 different parts, and each part has a value, and there's all kinds of different things we could be doing. So this is kind of saying, okay, look, we've been brilliant at pharma and tech, in Ireland. So what are the bioeconomy industries of the future that we want to make sure we have here in Ireland? And trying to plan out that and build in that and invest in it. And then flagship 3 is very much around the kind of a more place-based, as we would say, or a regional circular bioeconomy. So how do we build out circular bioeconomy on a regional level? This one is already well underway in the design phase, and we've been engaging with the 3 regions. So the East and Midlands, South West and Northwest, I think. I'm looking at how we can build that out. Then the bottom 4 flagships are the ones that I'm kind of more responsible for. My colleague Denise kind of leads on the first 3. So flagship 4, it's the National Carbon Farming Framework, essentially, which we hope will go beyond carbon farming and include biodiversity, nature credits, and emissions reductions as well. But I'll talk a bit more in detail on that one shortly. Flagship 5 hasn't quite started yet, but we're just at early stage. We're looking at how do we, and don't kill me for calling it climate neutral beef. It could be sustainable beef or whatever. We haven't kind of settled on a terminology here yet. But to look at the premise being that, from the meat sector, a lot of people will say, well, some of our more extensive beef farmers are probably close to being climate neutral already. So we're saying, okay, well, let's look at defining what that would mean on a farm, and then let's look at baselining some farms and seeing where we're at. And then is there a possibility to get a premium through the market for a certified product? So that's kind of what we're thinking of there. But as I said, very early stage on that. So happy to don't hold me to anything in particular on that one just yet. Flagship 6 on the dairy, this one has started. We've had some funding to actually get some different consultants or partners engaged on this. This has started in the last month. So we're trying to co-create with the dairy sector. What does sustainable dairy production look like? So this goes beyond the 25% reduction. What would actually a fully sustainable dairy production system look like? And that goes beyond environmental to include, your social, your economic, and I think we were having discussions the other day about even partly this kind of idea of inspiration, like to be proud of your product and the way you produce it, and to see a future in producing it. I think there's a bit there which is kind of interesting. So we're working on that at the moment, and then once we kind of come up with the definition is not quite the right term, maybe the boundary conditions or would be a better way of looking at it. Once we come up with that, then to kind of go, okay, what would that mean then for the dairy sector as it is now, if it were to transition to that? Is it even possible? And to figure that out. So that's that one. And then flagship 7 is growing and diversifying the tillage sector. So there's a Food Vision tillage group established back at the beginning of the summer, I think. So we're kind of waiting for that group to finalize its deliberations before we kind of push ahead, because we don't want to operate in parallel. We'd rather wait and see what comes out of that, and then we can take that and run with it and help to try and implement it, some of the recommendations from it. So that's our 7 flagships. In terms of the structure, the way all this is set up, so at the bottom of the screen there, you'll see we have our 7 flagships, F1 to 7. So for each flagship, we've set up kind of or we will, if we haven't already, set up a delivery team of a bunch of different stakeholders that are keen to drive it forward. Then we have what we call our portfolio management team, which is ourselves and DAFM. We have a kind of a tight-knit partnership there that will drive it forward. And then at the top, as I mentioned earlier, we have our consultative group that kind of oversees everything, and they will be doing kind of checking across all the flagships to see how they're going, not just the individual ones. So I probably mentioned a good bit of this already, so I don't really need to go into it in too much detail on this slide. But the idea around a national carbon farming framework, this was something that was in the DAFM's climate action plan already. It came out strongly as a priority with our stakeholder engagement. So there was an obvious kind of, well, let's work on it together, which is what we're doing. And I think just to kind of give a little flavor of how we've set that up, we have kind of 3 work packages. So there is a public consultation document available on the department's website at the moment, which please do go on and give your feedback. The questions aren't particularly heavy, but there is space there for your own comments or reflections at the end. But it will give us good direction on what should be included in a national framework. Then we have a second work package, which we call focused engagement, which, FDT is our flagship delivery team. So the different members of the team are working on that and engaging key stakeholders. So yesterday we met with 3 or 4 different farming organizations, and we've gone down to Cork and met with farmers as well. And we're continuing that over the next couple of months. Deadline for the framework is the end of the year or January next year. So there'll only be so much engagement we can get in this time around, but don't worry, this is version 1.0. There will be plenty of opportunities to, and it's maybe easier to comment and give feedback on something when it's in black and white on a page in front of you than to think about the theory of it. So then the third work package then is, once we have a better idea of what's in the framework, we will start work with pulling together some stakeholders to actually draft an implementation plan on how we might test it, or build the necessary structures and processes around having a national framework. So like governance structures, who's going to do the monitoring and verification, all that kind of stuff. Who does the data collection on the ground, the baselining if that's needed, and all that kind of stuff. I'm happy to take questions on that at the end as well. But just to give you an idea, this is the process we're in at the moment. And for the carbon farming framework, this is our kind of draft kind of outline of our table of contents at the moment. So if you have any feedback or input on any of these, do please stick it into the public consultation document. So again, the objective, the principles, like what kind of things should be included in the framework, fairness, this idea of just transition, like how do we make sure that people who've been doing good work all along get rewarded for that, or are rewarded for it, or have they already been rewarded for it through various schemes or grants, but to make sure it's fair. Governance, who's responsible, what measures will be included. So big discussions to be had on that, and where the science is. Who's going to do the monitoring, reporting and verification, all that kind of stuff, and the auditing. Again, we've already got Origin Green, so we, like, a lot of the building blocks for this are in place. It's maybe more pulling things together rather than reinventing the wheel. The financing piece is obviously the big question that everybody comes into. How much am I going to get? Who's going to pay for it? And we're working on that at the moment. Don't have any clear answers as yet, but the principle will be that it needs to be above and beyond what we're getting through CAP, that there's extra money here. That's what we're aiming for. And then, you know, at the end there, the capability needs then. So if we have this framework, do we have the resources and the capacity to actually implement it, and to figure out if there are gaps in that and what we need to do to close those gaps. So I'm focusing just on 2 flagships today, and this is the dairy one. As I mentioned, it's all about creating this idea of what sustainable dairy might look like, co-creating it, we'd like to say. So within this one, we have 4 work packages. So ourselves, we have funding from the Environmental Defence Fund Europe, which is a bit of a random one, but they set up in Europe a couple of years ago. They're a big American NGO, and they set up in Europe a couple of years ago to work on various environmental issues. And luckily, as part of their kind of focusing on what they wanted to work on, they wanted to work on agriculture, they wanted to work on methane reduction, and then they said Ireland would be a good place. And randomly, we just got chatting to them at the right time, so they had a few bob to throw our way to help us get this up and running. So myself and them, we're working on this first bit, which is the management and synthesis part of the flagship. We have one of our Climate Kick members, Metabolic, are working on this bit about defining the sustainable dairy. I don't like the term defining because it feels like one size fits all. It won't look like that. It'll be much more flexible, I think. But agreeing the boundary conditions, I think, maybe for sustainable dairy might be a better way of phrasing it. So they're looking at it from that perspective, taking in, you know, what they're doing all across Europe and around the world, and what's happening here in Ireland as well, obviously, and trying to kind of come up with something that might work in the Irish context. Work package 3 is we have NJB Consulting helping us on this one, and that's very much focused at the industry level and engaging co-ops and industry partners to kind of reflect on whatever those boundary conditions might be and go, okay, well, does that fit with my business model going forward? Am I okay with that? All that kind of stuff. Trying to engage them on testing it. And then work package 4 is kind of similar to work package 3, but coming at it from a very different perspective. There's an initiative down in Waterford called the Bioregional Weaving Lab, so that's the BWL, which is looking at this from a landscape perspective. They have a different approach. It's a much more bottom-up approach. I'd spent a huge amount of time building relationships and trust with people in the region, then looking at, okay, what would sustainable dairy look like in the Waterford region, I shouldn't say the Waterford region because it's more geographical. So the bioregion, and it's just a different perspective on things. And we kind of said, okay, this is something a bit different. Let's see if we put these 3 work packages together, what's the recipe that comes out of that, and take the best bits of everything, and hopefully we get something that will be really useful. So that's just a sample of 2 of the flagships. So of all the 7 flagships, 4 of them are kind of being what we call activated right now. And the other 3 we will start activating in the coming month or 6 weeks. And by activation, I mean, we go deep to design what we want to do, then we find the funding, and then we move into implementation stage. So we'll have an implementation plan at the end of the activation phase, and then we go into implementation. This just gives a little summary of our kind of ambition to get that done, but let's see how it goes. So we've got first waves and second waves. And then I mentioned earlier, this whole thing, the critical aspect of this going forward is going to be what we call the sense making, the learning loops. So we'll have our portfolio of flagships that we need to implement, and we'll do our kind of standard monitoring, good project management stuff. We need to build in consistently this idea of the innovation scanning. So what else is happening? So I said earlier that could be from around Europe, around the world, but it's also in Ireland and on farm. So it's to move away from this idea that someone is coming to you to give you options for what you can do. Maybe you can give them options for what they can share to other farmers. So to create the conditions for innovation to thrive, I guess. Then policy innovation, so looking at how we develop policy. Do we need new policies? Do we need to phase out old policies? Most definitely, I would say we probably will need to do that. So looking at that kind of stuff, and what new methodologies are there out there for doing that. And then obviously the financial architecture, find the funding, maintain the funding, grow the funding, all that kind of stuff. From maybe non-traditional sources. So this won't be looking just at EU and state funding. We'll have to look at investment, environmental, people want to philanthropy and that kind of stuff as well. And then, as I said, the capacity building piece is critical, both within each flagship and across all the flagships and across the system in general. So that's kind of the structure we would see going forward. And I'm going to stop there and open up for questions, if that's okay.
That's great. Thanks very much, Stewart. So please do use the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen to send us your questions for Stewart. Stewart is so we'll have a few questions ourselves first, Stewart. But yeah, do have a quick break there. It was a long presentation. So this seems to be a very strategic project, looking at longer timelines than beyond the 2030 timelines. If we were to ask you just in terms of the impacts on advisors and farmers, is this focused more post 2030? Would you argue, or is it what do farmers and advisors need to be keeping an eye out for and from this project?
I think it's both. I mean, we have to reach our 25% reduction targets for 2030. So we want to, but it's not just those targets. There's also, biodiversity targets, water quality targets. There's growing the tillage sector by 60,000 hectares by 2030. There's all those bits in it as well. It's not just the climate bit. So we're hoping that all of these things together can help us. No, it's not this initiative isn't going to do it on its own. There's just no way. But hopefully it can help to put a framework in place to join the dots between all the existing great stuff that's happening and say, okay, let's all pull in the same direction and to get this done. I think in terms of farmers, I suppose what we'll be looking for is to engage farmers more face to face as we design the flagships, but also through implementation to set up some kind of continual reflection focus groups that come back every 6 months or a year or whatever. I don't know how we'll set it up, but to make sure we get the ground truthing bit right, because very easy to kind of go and say we're going to do this, that, and the other, and then somebody tried that before, it's not going to work, and you have to build that relationship and that trust and all that kind of stuff to move it forward. So I think with the MAC we have a lot of these on-farm climate mitigation measures in place. I don't think there's a big ask beyond let's get those implemented. And I think with flagship 4 around the ecosystem services or carbon farming, what we would hope to do is to bring in let's call it a scheme through the framework that will pay for some of those things. So, you're not just getting paid for your products anymore. Well, I know there's obviously you've got acres and all the things. We do get the schemes, we have get paid for the environmental schemes. But can we have that additional piece of value for a farmer that makes them, I don't say makes them, I hate that term, but that when you're making a decision on your farm about how you want to manage it, that factors into your decision. Okay, well, if I raise the water table on that field or I shut off that corner and leave it for biodiversity, well, maybe economically I'll be better off, and environmentally I'm doing the right thing, and that just works in my situation. Maybe I'm a part-time farmer and I don't have the time to be. Maybe I could cut my stock a couple and still be doing the right thing and have everything just right, and maybe I get a premium price for my product potentially down the line. I think that's where we want to get to, but maybe that's a bit utopian. I don't know.
If I may, I mean, you have a lot of experience, international experience in this area, and I attended a conference recently in Germany, and a very eminent professor was speaking at it, and he was saying he was quite frustrated actually with he said there's so much talk about climate change or climate action, and plans and strategies and so on, but in terms of it translating into action, and this isn't specific to agriculture, it was across all of the different sectors, and he just felt we need to move much more quickly around this whole area. What are your own thoughts on that, and how can we mobilize our efforts more quickly? And it's a big question, I know.
Yeah, look, I suppose you can wheel out the old chestnut. We should have started 20-30 years ago, but the best time to start is now if you haven't started already. I think we're doing a huge amount in Ireland. I think the 25% target has really focused minds, and not just minds, but actions. Now, that only came in a year ago. Things don't happen overnight, but it's like if we tried to do this piece of work 4 years ago, we would have gotten nowhere. We'd still be treading water, barely keeping our heads above water, I'd say. But now everybody's keen to be in the room because they want to know how we're going to do it, and they want to be part of doing it. And I see that across the board, from input suppliers to farmers to industry to processors, everybody. There's a small fringe minority that want us to stop producing cattle altogether, and then there's a small fringe minority that wants let's produce more and more and more and more and forget about the environment. They are tiny fractions at the very margins as far as I'm concerned. The 95% or so are in the middle who want to get stuff done. I think the critical thing to remember is change is different for everybody. I remember, I think I was chatting to someone from Teagasc way back, and they were saying, like, can you imagine if we moved away from can? If no Irish farmer was using can, that's a huge change. And I'm thinking, well, that's not that big of a change, really. Like, because protected urea or can, like, it's not that big of a difference, is it? But I think, for different people, change is different. And I think once we all start moving, and the numbers are moving in the right direction now, I think that gives a sense of, yeah, we can do this. And success breeds success. You go out and support your local hurling team or football team. When they win one championship, they're likely to go on and get in a semi-final or a final again the next year. There's a belief there, and hopefully Ireland have winning their games. They'll win again on Saturday night. It's that kind of thing, and it's those intangibles that we need to build on, because we have the bricks and mortar. We just need to get around and start building the house. I think we have started. It's not that we haven't.
Yeah.
We haven't got the roof on yet, but we're getting.
Yeah, well, I think last week's sustainability report really showed that progress is being made, and the figures are going in the right direction. Had some very, very interesting questions coming through from our audience this morning. You're on mute.
Sorry, do you want me to look at the Q&A? Sorry, I don't know.
Apologies.
We'll put the questions to you, Stewart.
Okay, good.
Yeah. No, and a question there, and it's quite specific in relation to flagship 5. You're using the word sustainable for the dairy sector, but would we be better to use sustainable grass-fed and incorporate another element, I suppose, of sustainability in that?
Yeah, look, I think what we want to do is agree what should be included for it to be sustainable. And we don't want to, like, the definition for sustainable, we think could be different for different kind of production systems in some ways. So it's not that it's a definition, it's more boundary conditions. So I think it's a really tricky one, and we wouldn't want to go into too much going like, does it have to be grass-fed or does it have to be something else? I think it's economic, social, environmental, and potentially this extra a bit on the inspiration piece, that there's a future in this for me and my family or my farm partnership or whatever it is. I think I'd be reluctant to add a particular, because then you don't want to marginalize somebody who could be doing great things, but you just haven't thought of them yet. So that's kind of the right look at it.
There's a question there, and it's something you alluded to, that how are we going to develop systems that appreciate and don't penalize those who have already been making those strides in a policy framework which usually focuses just on change and on so it's maybe a little bit about protecting what has been developed as well as just paying for change.
Yeah, and I think this is really tricky bit. The short answer is we'll figure it out together, I guess. Like one of our key stakeholders is the National Economic and Social Council, who wrote the report earlier in the year on just transition in agriculture. So we're obviously tapping into their expertise on this. It's not going to be easy, I would say. Currently, and this is me speaking, I'm not speaking for anybody else, I don't see anything that would disincentivize good work that's been done already. But will that good work be rewarded is a different question. Now, I think the way we're looking at the Carbon Farming Ecosystem Services framework is that if we can include what I call the 3 buckets, so emissions reductions, carbon removals and sequestration in soil or in trees or hedgerows, and the third one then being around biodiversity, water quality. I think there's a potential there for, the way we kind of score biodiversity at the moment. So say you have a good score on your farm already, that you would get rewarded for that score. So if you were getting a 4 out of 10, you're getting a certain payment. If you get a 10 out of 10, you're getting a different payment. So if you're already at a 10 out of 10, I would see there's potential there to get a payment for that 10 out of 10 and to maintain that. Because you don't want it to go backwards, so you want to maintain it, so you keep the payment. Whereas emissions reduction or sequestering carbon in your soil, if you've already been doing great things for years, there might be less opportunity or scope for you to increase that or to get a payment for that, which is tricky, because the principles of the framework will likely be around additionality. So it only pays for additional sequestration or emissions reductions. But having said that, I think if you've got a big enough list of measures in there that you can do, I think there's room for everybody to get something out of it. Like it won't work for every farmer, I don't think, but I think it'll work in some way for lots. And say potentially if things like, methane inhibitors in livestock feed could be included potentially. I'm not saying they will be, but if they were included, like that might say, well, I might not make a lot of money, but it might cover my costs for buying that stuff, and I can drive down my emissions. So it's that kind of stuff, I think we don't know what will be in it yet, so hard to say, but I think there'll be something in it for most people. But I think that fairness piece needs to be thrashed out. We need to figure it out.
Okay, question there in relation to flagship 4 to 10. It looks very like the Teagasc strategy and the Department of Agriculture strategy. So I suppose two questions arising from that. Where do you see yourselves adding value to the work that's already going on with the likes of Teagasc Borbia, Department of Agriculture, and what space do you see yourselves providing funding to add that extra benefit?
Okay, so I think with all of the flagships, there's a huge amount going on already. So we recognize this very early on. So our role is really connecting the dots and facilitating a process. It's not reinventing the wheel here. Like there's so much good stuff happening, that with a little bit of tweak and shift and maybe a bit more funding, we can really hit the ground. Well, we're already hitting the ground walking. We can get up to a run, I think. So I think that's where we see our added value to this is, the kind of the honest broker, but the mediator in the middle to kind of pull people together and to co-create and organize people to come around and to put a structure in place that we can build around. I think that's probably where we add most value. Now, as I said, one of our deliverables is to find funding for all these flagships. That's a huge piece of work, and we are working on that in the background, trying to figure out what's the best way of pulling all that together, for individual flagships, but also for the entire portfolio. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but we're working on various bits and pieces. We have a whole funding and finance team that are kind of looking at that, and obviously we're engaged with the Strategic Investment Fund, we're engaged with banks, we're engaged with the department, with the EU. So I don't know what it'll look like, but there's a commitment there from our side to try and solve that, at least to some extent, and to drive things forward. So I think that I suppose our added value is trying to amplify the impact. That the potential is there for impact. We just want to help people realize it. I think that's probably where we come in. So, and maybe I'm being a bit too picking my own role up here, but
well, and realizing you're at an early stage of the development of all of this. A question there in relation to the I suppose the relative potential impacts, or the relative need, if you want to look at it from the other perspective, of policy versus I suppose support type initiatives in relation to and what I mean by policy is a more restrictive policy. So in terms of getting where we need to get to, how does the balance between forcing farmers' hands in relation to with policy versus incentivizing through other mechanisms, how much of both are we likely to have to implement?
In terms of regulation and policy, I don't know that there's massive shifts needed. Like we have our 25% target, we have our biodiversity targets, we have we have a lot of these things are there or will be there very soon. We know what good water quality is. We know what quality food is. We know what safe food is. We know all these things. So that's kind of there. What we don't have is maybe this idea, and I think we were chatting about this before we came on, is this idea of what is a sustainable farm family? And I deliberately put the word family in there because this came up just recently, that it's not just about the farmer, it's about the farm family and the farm community. And figuring that out, and then, okay, if that's what we want, how do we get it? I think there's a little bit of a shift in thinking maybe needed there. But I don't see, like, you've been around even a little bit longer than I have. The Irish government is not looking to impose restrictions at the moment. I think this will all be voluntary, and it will be looking to incentivize the behaviors that we want. I don't see that changing in the short term, but then governments change, and who knows? Like we all very familiar with what's going on in Brussels and in the Netherlands with some of the imposed changes there and how difficult that has made things. Nobody wants that here. So we have a chance, a window of opportunity, I suppose, to work on this together, to move it the way we want to do it. At the moment, like, nobody's talking about saying, you have to have this or you have to have that. It's about, like, what can we put in place to incentivize the behaviors that we want, or to incentivize the industries that we want to grow, and that kind of thing. And like on the tillage one, for instance, like, it's very much around, like, well, if we want another 60,000 hectares of tillage, like, that land has to come from somewhere. It can't come from peatlands. It can't come from forestry. So it's going to have to come from livestock production. But so how do we manage that? How do we do it?
Stuart,
So go ahead.
Yes, sorry, Stuart. We're getting close to the end of the session. So, but you did mention during your presentation that you saw that some policies being discontinued as part of that policy lab exercise. Like, what sort of areas are you looking at there?
Yeah, I actually don't know. But it's part of this whole transition process, that some things we're doing need to be scaled up, and some things we're doing need to be scaled down and scaled out, and that's just a fact. So whether that be on farm or it be at policy level, I think you always hear these things when you chat to farmers. But you were paying me to take out the hedges a couple of years ago. Now you're paying me to put them back in again, and so it's looking at what's in there already and going, like, is that actually contributing positively to what we want to achieve? And if it's not, we need to phase it out. And phase in things, as I just said to Pat there, like, phase in things that incentivize what we want and phase out things that don't.
Makes sense. We're not layering on top of.
I don't know what those things would be. I think, but there's a piece of work there to sit down and figure out, what's here that just doesn't make sense anymore, that we need to get rid of. And then it's not just stopping it quickly. It's like figuring out, okay, can we stop it right now, or does it need to be tapered?
I think what you're alluding to is the fact that we have a tendency to layer policy on top of the previous policy, on top of the previous policy, on top of the previous policy, and not look at the coherence of an overall policy interface. And I think there's plenty of examples of where that could be tackled. Question there in relation to carbon offsetting and the potential role of carbon offsetting, and how much work have we to do in relation to carbon offsetting to get to a point where we'll be able to do something meaningful at farm level?
I was wondering how long it was going to take for offsetting or insetting to be raised. So, like, the offsetting bit is really tricky. I think personally, I'm worried about offsetting in terms of selling credits outside of our agri-food system, because all the offsetting that's going on at the moment, there's a huge question marks over how actual credible it is and how much it is actually driving down emissions. Now, if we have a very strong and robust monitoring and verification system here, obviously that's great. But if everybody's driving down their emissions, where's the market for credits in the future? That's my kind of take on it. Now, so it might be an interim source of funding to get things moving, but I wouldn't be putting all my eggs in that basket. However, trying to tie a price premium, or consumer ultimately paying a premium for sustainably produced product, which would be insetting essentially, is a real challenge as well in some sectors more than others. So I don't know. I think there could be a combination of things, of funding sources for this, but I think that is something that really needs to be figured out, and it's something we're trying to figure out. When you talk to finance people, they say there's money there. I'm aware, but I think until we have a fairly robust framework that we can put in front of funders and financiers, then it's hard to see. And actually, we're engaging them already in trying to figure out what would they need to see in it for them to invest in something. So there's a bit of
the point remains though, Stewart, and you're absolutely right. And I think several of our speakers have spoken about this, that offsetting in terms of global emissions, your impact is very limited there. So I mean, that's what we ultimately need to focus on is decarbonization and reducing our overall emissions. We probably have time for one more question there from the audience.
Yeah, no, there's and I suppose a question there in relation to the type of initiatives and the type of innovations that you see yourselves funding, to get an understanding of where the opportunity might be for others to work with you. What are the areas that you're looking at there being a potential for funding?
I mean, look, I was chatting to someone the other day about setting up. Well, he says Ireland's first, but maybe the world's first carbon neutral malting facility. So that's part of bioeconomy stuff, including in that a sustainable supply chain in that as well. So there's all kinds of things in here. Chatting to somebody else, I don't know if anyone's heard of silicate. Basically, what they are looking into is, can liming actually lock away carbon? Does it already do this? And could you put a coating on the lime so there's no peak in emissions when you do the actual liming? But then is this what's it called, geo-weathering? Is that what happens when you put lime on the ground, that it locks away carbon indefinitely? And if that's the case, wouldn't that be brilliant if you get paid a bit of a bonus for that? You get your soil fertility, you get your carbon removals, you get everything from it. So I think there's an infinite amount of things going on that can contribute to this. Obviously, a big one is the measurement. If we have to baseline all these things on a farm, it's very expensive to go out and do that on every farm. So where's the tech that can give us really robust data, but at a much lower cost than where we're at the moment? And I think there's a huge amount of stuff there.
Okay. There's one possibly slightly cheeky question, wondering who are the US philanthropists who are interested in funding. I suspect they might be looking for a little bit of insight for themselves. I don't expect an answer to that, by the way.
No, I'm not sure that's beyond my pay grade in my organization. There's our dear leaders are working on with those people and trying to figure out. It's not just US though; it would be globally. And to see, we're trying to set up this thing called I think it's the 1.5 fund. So we're trying to get a fund of 1.5 billion put together that can fund potentially portfolios like this one here in Ireland and other things as well.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap it up there, Stewart. We did have one final comment there. I do want to read out, just in relation to farm size needs to be taken into account, and our definition of the family farm, I suppose, needs to be reconsidered, and particularly with the increasing size of farms that has been happening over the last number of years, and the viability obviously plays a big factor in there. So look, Stewart, thank you so much. Really interesting presentation, and I think that if people want to find out more about the project, there is a project website, I understand. Just Google
Deep Ireland Land Agri Food Deep Demonstration. Either bring it to our website or DAFN's, one or the other. All the stuff is there. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, well, thanks very much, Stuart, and Pat. Thanks very much for helping with the questions, and our thanks to Mary in the background, helping with the technical side today. Next week, we'll be joined by James Rambod, who's a technologist with Teagasc, and we'll be discussing farm data to decarbonisation, building the backbone of a national carbon monitoring network. So James has some really interesting work that's going on across the whole of Ireland to monitor the carbon emissions from our farmlands. So until next week, and just a final reminder that today is brought to you as part of an overall series of events as part of Sustainability Month in Teagasc. So do look up the Teagasc website to find out more about events and be it digital or face-to-face events that are happening over the course of the month. So there's lots happening there, and I'm sure there's something happening close to where you're based, wherever you are in Ireland. So until next week, thanks for watching, and we want to say a final best of luck to our boys in green tomorrow night in France, who we hope do the business. So we want to wish them all the very best. So until next week, take care and enjoy the rest of the weekend.